Greetings, my fellow adventurers. It's Alara. Welcome back to our cozy sanctuary, where the enchanted halls of Hogwarts and the wonder of everyday magic come alive in stories of discovery, courage, and the boundless curiosity that defines young witches and wizards. Tonight, you'll step into the shoes of a Hogwarts student and experience the thrill of a day filled with magical lessons, secret corridors, and the ancient mysteries hidden within the castle's walls. So, find your coziest spot. Let the flicker of candlelight and the soft rustle of enchanted pages spark your imagination, and prepare to be swept away into a world of spells, whispered secrets, and the timeless magic of Hogwarts. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what magical adventures you'd love to explore next. If you'd like to support the channel, you can join the Griffin's Nest on Patreon for ad-free and background music-free versions of our stories. Let's begin. The enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall was a shifting canvas of grays and silvers this morning, reflecting the overcast skies outside. You sat at the long table for your house, Ravenclaw, your robes slightly rumpled from a restless night of sleep. The lingering haze of your dreams mixed with the warmth of the castle, and the scent of fresh toast and sizzling sausages wafting from the breakfast platters was a comforting contrast to the brisk, late autumn chill in the air. Your fingers brushed the spine of your herbology textbook, 1,000 magical herbs and fungi, but your mind wandered to the charms lesson awaiting you after breakfast. Professor Flitwick had hinted at something exciting during yesterday's class, a spell involving objects that could hover and dance in midair, but only if cast with the right flourish. You imagined what it would be like to get it right on the first try, and have your classmates applaud. A tiny flicker of pride bloomed in your chest. "Pass the marmalade, would you?" came a familiar voice, breaking your reverie. You turned to see Felicity Waters, a fellow Ravenclaw. Her blonde hair was tied back into a neat ponytail, and her bright eyes gleamed with the eagerness of someone who thrived on the buzz of morning conversations. You handed her the jar and gave her a half smile. "Another late night studying, I see," she teased, gesturing at your slightly bloodshot eyes. "You're not trying to outdo the OWLs already, are you?" "Hardly," you replied, pouring yourself a glass of pumpkin juice. "Just couldn't sleep. I kept dreaming about... Never mind." Felicity raised an eyebrow but didn't press. She had a knack for knowing when not to pry, which was one of the reasons you got along so well. Instead, she launched into a story about a first year who had somehow transfigured their robes into a squawking chicken during yesterday's lesson with Professor McGonagall. As Felicity spoke, the morning hum of the Great Hall rose around you, clinking cutlery, murmured conversations, and the occasional laugh. The golden plates glimmered under the floating candles that bobbed gently overhead. At the Gryffindor table, a group of students appeared to be plotting something mischievous, their hushed whispers punctuated by snickers. At the Slytherin table, a tall, pale boy was poring over a weathered book, muttering incantations under his breath. At your table, you heard snippets of debate about today's transfiguration homework. Someone claimed they'd perfected the spell to turn a pincushion into a hedgehog, while another swore that their hedgehog was still bristling with sewing needles. The morning unfolded with a sense of organized chaos, typical of Hogwarts. but there was something magical about it. Something that made you feel at home, even amid the clatter and noise. By the time breakfast ended, you felt a familiar pang of urgency. The enchanted clock in the great hall chimed 9:15, and you had just enough time to grab your books and make it to the charms corridor. The Ravenclaw Tower was on the opposite side of the castle, and the journey was anything but straightforward. You hoisted your bag over your shoulder, the strap digging slightly into your robes, and darted through the arched doorway. The corridors were already bustling with students heading to their first lessons, the air alive with the shuffle of robes, hurried footsteps, and snippets of conversation. The castle seemed determined to test your punctuality this morning. As you rounded a corner near the moving staircases, you found yourself face to face with a trick step that sank beneath your weight. You yelped, your leg plunging knee-deep into the enchanted trap. A passing Hufflepuff chuckled before helping you out with an amused, "Better keep an eye out next time." "Thanks," you muttered, brushing off your robes and hurrying on, your cheeks warm with embarrassment. By the time you entered the charms classroom, you were slightly out of breath. Professor Flitwick, standing on a stack of books at his podium, was in the middle of calling the roll. You slipped into a seat near the middle of the room, relieved that you hadn't missed the start of the lesson. The classroom was bright and airy, with high windows that let in the pale morning light. Shelves lined with spell books and enchanted objects framed the walls, and a faint smell of parchment and ink hung in the air. "Today," Professor Flitwick began in his cheerful, high-pitched voice, "we'll be practicing the levitation charm. A foundational spell, yes, but one with endless applications. With a flick of your wand and a precise incantation, you can make even the heaviest of objects dance in the air. Now, who can remind me of the proper incantation?" A few hands shot up, including Felicity's. You didn't bother raising yours. You knew the answer, but you preferred to avoid the spotlight. "Yes, Miss Waters," Flitwick called. "It's Wingardium Leviosa, Professor," Felicity said confidently. "Excellent. 5 points to Ravenclaw." Flitwick beamed, clapping his hands together. "Now, let's get started. Wands out, everyone." You drew your wand, a sleek, polished length of black walnut with a faintly spiraling grain, and pointed it at the feather placed before you on the desk. The room filled with murmurs of the incantation as students began practicing. "Remember, it's Leviosa, not Leviosa," Flitwick said, demonstrating with an exaggerated flourish of his tiny wand. You concentrated, your wand poised. "Wingardium Leviosa," you said, swishing and flicking as Flitwick had instructed. The feather trembled slightly, but stayed rooted to the desk. You frowned, adjusting your grip. "Try lifting your wrist more during the swish," Felicity suggested from beside you, her own feather already floating serenely in midair. You tried again, this time focusing on the subtle motion of your wrist. "Wingardium Leviosa." The feather lifted off the desk, hovering shakily a few inches above the wood. A thrill of satisfaction coursed through you as you guided it gently upward. "Well done," Professor Flitwick exclaimed, clapping his hands. "That's the spirit. Keep practicing, everyone." The lesson proceeded smoothly until a commotion broke out near the back of the room, One of the Gryffindor students, a boy named Colin, had accidentally sent his feather flying straight into a Slytherin's cauldron bag. The Slytherin, a sharp-featured girl named Clarice, glared at him. "Watch where you're waving that thing, mudblood," she hissed. A tense silence fell over the room. You felt a surge of anger at her words, your grip tightening on your wand. "Clarice," Professor Flitwick said sharply, his cheerful tone replaced by one of stern authority. "That language is unacceptable. 10 points from Slytherin, and I'll be having a word with your head of house." Clarice's expression darkened, but she said nothing, sinking lower into her seat. Colin muttered an apology to no one in particular, his cheeks red with embarrassment. As the lesson resumed, you felt a pang of sympathy for Colin. Hogwarts was a place of magic and wonder, but it wasn't always kind. By the time the class ended, you felt a mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. The morning had been a whirlwind of challenges and small triumphs, from navigating the castle's quirks to mastering the levitation charm. As you packed up your things, Felicity turned to you with a grin. "See? You got the hang of it," she said. "Thanks," you replied, managing a smile. The corridors outside were alive with students heading to their next classes or sneaking off to the library or the courtyard. You had a free period next, and you decided to spend it by the lake. The crisp autumn air greeted you as you stepped out into the courtyard and made your way toward the lake. The grounds were quieter now, with most students inside the Great Hall for lunch. You found your usual spot beneath a sprawling oak tree by the water's edge, setting your bag down on the cool grass. The lake stretched out before you, its surface rippling faintly under the soft breeze. The giant squid's tentacles occasionally broke the water's surface, languidly rising and falling before vanishing again. The peaceful scene was a welcome contrast to the bustling energy of the castle. You leaned back against the tree trunk, letting your thoughts drift. The morning had been a mix of triumph and tension, and you couldn't shake the feeling that the rest of the day would bring something different. At Hogwarts, the extraordinary often felt inevitable. Your fingers absently traced the edge of your wand, its polished surface smooth and comforting beneath your touch. Part of you wanted to practice more charms, to channel the momentum from your earlier success. But for now, the quiet was enough. The sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel path drew your attention. Turning, you saw Colin Creevey approaching, his Gryffindor scarf trailing behind him. His face was flushed from the brisk air, and he looked slightly out of breath, as though he'd been searching for you. "There you are," he exclaimed, jogging the last few steps to reach you. You raised an eyebrow. "Colin, what's going on?" He glanced over his shoulder, as if checking to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in conspiratorially. "I need your help. There's something strange going on in the dungeons." You blinked, caught off guard by the urgency in his tone. "The dungeons? What do you mean?" Colin hesitated, his eyes darting to the lake before settling on you. "I was down there earlier. Don't ask why. And I heard these whispers. They weren't normal whispers, though. They were cold, like they were inside my head." "Inside your head?" you repeated, skepticism creeping into your voice. He nodded fervently, and the air felt wrong, too. Heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I swear, it wasn't just my imagination. You frowned, considering his words. Colin was known for his overactive imagination, but there was something in his expression, an urgency that felt genuine. "Did you tell a professor?" you asked. Colin shook his head quickly. "I didn't want to get in trouble for being down there. But you're a Ravenclaw. You're good at figuring things out, right? I thought maybe you could..." He trailed off, his plea hanging in the air. You sighed, glancing back at the lake. The peaceful moment you'd carved out for yourself was rapidly slipping away, replaced by a growing curiosity. Hogwarts was full of secrets, and the dungeons were no exception. If there was something strange happening down there, it was worth investigating. "Fine," you said, standing and brushing off your robes. "But if this turns out to be nothing, you owe me." Colin grinned, his relief evident. "Deal." The journey to the dungeons was quieter than you expected. Most students were still at lunch, leaving the corridors eerily empty. The dim light from the high, narrow windows cast long shadows along the stone walls, and the sound of your footsteps echoed in the chilly air. Colin led the way, his Gryffindor scarf swaying with each step. "It was near the potions storeroom," he said over his shoulder. "That's where I heard it." As you descended deeper into the castle, the air grew colder. The smell of damp stone and mildew was stronger here, mingling with faint traces of potion ingredients. Rotten eggs, sulfur, and something metallic. When you reached the storeroom, Colin stopped abruptly. "It was here," he whispered, pointing to a narrow alcove just beyond the door. You moved closer, your wand gripped tightly in your hand. The alcove was unremarkable at first glance, but as you stepped inside, you felt the air shift. A faint hum reached your ears, like the low vibration of distant magic. And then you heard it, the whispers. They were faint at first, a soft, indistinct murmur that seemed to brush against your mind. But as you focused, they grew clearer, though the words themselves were still unintelligible. The sound was cold, almost unnatural, and it sent a shiver down your spine. "Do you hear that?" Colin asked, his voice barely audible. You nodded, your eyes fixed on the alcove's stone wall. Something about it felt wrong. The stone was darker here, almost black, and faint traces of magic radiated from a narrow crack that ran vertically along its surface. "What do you think it is?" Colin whispered. You didn't answer immediately, your mind racing. The magic here felt old, far older than anything you'd encountered before. Whatever was behind this wall, it wasn't meant to be found easily. "We should tell someone," Colin said, his voice tinged with nervousness. "A professor. They'll know what to do." But you hesitated. The whispers were faint now, but they carried a sense of urgency, as if they were calling to you specifically. What if this was a puzzle, a test meant to be solved? "No," you said finally. "Not yet. Let's figure out what this is first." Colin's eyes widened. "Are you serious? What if it's dangerous?" "It probably is," you admitted. "But doesn't that make it more important to figure out?" Before Colin could protest, you raised your wand and pointed it at the crack. "Lumos." The tip of your wand flared with light, illuminating the alcove. As the light touched the crack, the whispers grew louder for a moment before abruptly stopping. The silence that followed was almost more unsettling than the sound. You leaned closer, your heart pounding. For a moment you thought you felt something, a faint pulse of energy, like a heartbeat, radiating from the wall. The tension in the air was palpable as the two of you stood there, staring at the crack in the wall. Somewhere in the shadows, the whispers stirred again, faint and cold. The whispers returned as soon as the light from your wand dimmed. Soft, insistent, and chilling, they seemed to pull at the edges of your thoughts, urging you to stay. The crack in the stone wall, faintly illuminated in the dim light of the dungeons, almost seemed to shimmer, as if alive. Colin shuffled nervously beside you, his Gryffindor scarf clutched in one hand. "I don't like this," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It feels wrong." You couldn't deny the eerie atmosphere, but the whispers called to your curiosity, like a moth to a flame. Hogwarts was ancient, filled with secrets and puzzles meant to challenge the brave or the foolish. This might be one of those moments where the line blurred. "I think it's some kind of passage," you said, pressing your palm gently against the cold stone. The faint pulse of magic you'd felt earlier was unmistakable now, rhythmic and steady, like the heartbeat of the castle itself. "And you think it's a good idea to open it?" Colin asked, his eyes wide. "Do you think it's a good idea to leave it alone?" you countered. Colin didn't reply, but his nervous silence spoke volumes. The crack in the wall was too thin for you to peer through, but it radiated a peculiar kind of magic. Old, like the air in a forgotten library. You stepped back, twirling your wand in your fingers, and thought about the best spell to use. "Alohomora won't work on something like this," you murmured. "Of course not," Colin said. "It's probably enchanted to keep people out, maybe for a good reason. Or it's hiding something incredible," you said, more to yourself than to him. You ran through your mental list of spells and settled on a hunch. Raising your wand, you pointed it at the crack and whispered, "Revelio." The spell's energy rippled through the air, revealing faint runic markings etched around the edges of the crack. They glowed softly, their shapes unfamiliar, yet mesmerizing. "It's protected by some kind of ancient magic," you said, brushing your fingers over the runes. "This isn't just a wall, it's a doorway." Colin took a step back. "I'm not sure I want to know what's on the other side." Before you could respond, a third voice interrupted. "Neither do I, but here we are." You turned sharply to see Felicity standing at the entrance of the alcove, arms crossed and her wand loosely gripped in one hand. "What are you doing here?" you asked, your voice laced with surprise. "Looking for you," she said pointedly. "When you didn't show up for lunch or transfiguration, I figured you'd gotten yourself into trouble. Again." Her eyes flicked to the glowing runes on the wall, and it looks like I was right. With Felicity now present, the tension shifted. Her practical, no-nonsense demeanor had a way of grounding you, even in the face of magical mysteries. She stepped closer to the wall, her gaze narrowing as she studied the runes. "Any idea what language this is?" she asked. "Not one I recognize," you admitted. "It's old magic," Felicity said, her voice quieter now. "Really old. Whatever's behind this wall, someone went to a lot of trouble to keep it hidden." Colin fidgeted nervously. "So, maybe we should leave it alone?" but Felicity ignored him, raising her wand. Runes like these are usually tied to specific spells. If we break the enchantment, the doorway should open. And what if the doorway doesn't want to be opened? Colin muttered. Felicity gave him a sharp look, but didn't reply. Instead, she pointed her wand at the wall and began to cast. Finite incantatem. The runes flared brightly, pulsing like fire for a moment, before fading into darkness. The crack widened, the stone grinding against itself as the hidden door began to open. The whispers grew louder, sharper now, cutting through the air like icy blades. You exchanged a nervous glance with Felicity, and for the first time you saw uncertainty in her eyes. The door swung open fully, revealing a narrow stone passage that disappeared into the darkness. Brilliant, Felicity said, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. Colin groaned. This is the part where we leave, right? But you were already stepping forward, your wand raised and your heart pounding. We didn't come this far to turn back now. The air in the passage was colder than the rest of the dungeons, and the walls were damp with condensation. The faint light from your wand cast long, flickering shadows as you moved deeper into the tunnel, Felicity and Colin close behind. Does anyone else feel like we're walking into a trap? Colin asked, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Shh, Felicity hissed. We'll be fine. Probably. You tried to ignore the sinking feeling in your stomach, focusing instead on the path ahead. The whispers had stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence. The deeper you went, the more you felt the presence of something watching you, though you saw no sign of movement. Eventually, the passage opened into a circular chamber. The walls were lined with strange carvings, twisting shapes and runes that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. At the center of the room was a stone pedestal, and resting atop it was a small, glowing orb. What is that? Colin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, you admitted, stepping closer. The orb pulsed faintly, its light casting strange patterns on the walls. You could feel its magic from where you stood, ancient and powerful, yet strangely inviting. Felicity grabbed your arm. Wait, don't touch it. Why not? Because things like this usually come with curses, she said dryly. Just look at it. It's practically screaming, I'll ruin your life if you touch me. Then why would someone hide it? Colin asked, peering nervously at the carvings on the walls. Because it's valuable, Felicity said. Or dangerous. Or both. You hesitated, torn between your curiosity and Felicity's warning. The orb seemed to call to you, its light growing brighter as you stepped closer. We can't leave it here, you said finally. What if someone else finds it? Or what if it's meant to stay here? Felicity countered. But your decision was already made. Ignoring her protests, you reached out and carefully lifted the orb from the pedestal. The room immediately began to tremble, the carvings on the walls glowing brightly. What did you do? Colin shouted, panic rising in his voice. Before you could answer, the whispers returned, louder and more menacing than before. The ground beneath you shook violently, and a low, guttural roar echoed through the chamber. We need to get out of here, Felicity yelled, pulling you toward the passage. Clutching the orb tightly, you followed her, the roar growing louder behind you. Whatever you had unleashed, it wasn't happy, and it wasn't going to let you leave without a fight. The ground beneath your feet trembled violently as you ran, the guttural roar echoing through the stone passageway, like a beast awakening after centuries of slumber. You clutched the glowing orb tightly to your chest, its light pulsing in time with the vibrations that shook the walls. Every instinct told you to drop it and run, but some deep part of you refused to let it go. "Faster!" Felicity shouted, her voice nearly drowned out by the rumble of collapsing stone behind you. "I'm trying!" Colin yelped, his Gryffindor scarf fluttering wildly as he sprinted ahead. His bag thumped against his side, its contents rattling loudly. The whispers were no longer soft or distant. They screamed now, rising in pitch and urgency, as though the very air had turned against you. They filled your head, clawing at your thoughts and making it harder to concentrate on the uneven ground beneath your feet. "Keep going," Felicity urged, her hand gripping your sleeve as she pulled you forward. The passage seemed to stretch endlessly, the faint light of your wand flickering as though struggling against the oppressive darkness. Behind you, the roar grew louder, accompanied by the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps. Whatever you had disturbed, it wasn't just magic. It was alive. The three of you barely made it to the entrance of the alcove before the trembling turned into a full-on collapse. The walls groaned, and chunks of stone rained down from the ceiling. "Move!" Felicity yelled, shoving you toward the dungeon corridor. You stumbled out into the open just as the passage behind you caved in with a deafening crash. Dust and debris filled the air, and you coughed, your chest heaving as you tried to catch your breath. Colin leaned against the wall, his face pale. What was that?" he stammered, his eyes wide with terror. Felicity turned to you, her expression a mix of anger and fear. "You're the one who had to touch it," she snapped. "Care to explain what just happened?" You looked down at the orb in your hands. Its light had dimmed slightly, but it still pulsed faintly, its warmth seeping into your palms. "I don't know," you admitted, your voice barely above a whisper. "But whatever it is, it's powerful." "That's an understatement," Felicity muttered, brushing dust off her robes. "We just unleashed something, and it's not going to stop until it finds us." Colin groaned, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor. "This is why we leave weird, magical things alone," he said, burying his face in his hands. Before you could respond, the temperature in the corridor dropped suddenly, and the air grew heavy. A faint glow appeared at the far end of the hall, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down your spine. Felicity swore under her breath, drawing her wand. "It followed us." "What followed us?" Colin asked, his voice trembling as he scrambled to his feet. You turned slowly, your wand raised. The glow at the end of the hall intensified, revealing a massive, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. Its form was indistinct, like smoke given shape, but its presence was undeniably real. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, as the creature advanced toward you. "What do we do?" Colin whispered, his voice barely audible. Run? You suggested, your heart pounding. Felicity shook her head. No time. We fight. The creature lunged, its shadowy limbs stretching out toward you. Felicity stepped forward, her wand slashing through the air as she cast Stupefy. The spell struck the creature, but it barely flinched, its smoky form rippling as if the magic had passed through water. It's not working, Felicity yelled, dodging as the creature swiped at her. You raised your own wand, thinking quickly. If conventional spells didn't work, perhaps the orb could help. Its magic pulsed in your hands, as though responding to your thoughts. Give me time, you shouted to Felicity. She nodded grimly, standing her ground as she continued casting spells to distract the creature. Colin, trembling but determined, added his own spells to the fray, though the creature seemed unaffected by either of them. Holding the orb tightly, you focused on its energy. It felt alive, ancient, and powerful, but it also felt chaotic, like a storm barely contained. You closed your eyes, trying to channel that power. Lumos Maxima! You shouted, directing the light toward the creature. The orb flared brightly in response, flooding the corridor with blinding golden light. The creature let out a deafening roar, recoiling as the light pierced its shadowy form. It's working, Felicity called out, her voice tinged with surprise. Encouraged, you stepped forward, the orb glowing brighter in your hands. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, but you pushed through, focusing on the creature. Expulso! The light from the orb surged outward, striking the creature and causing it to shatter into a cloud of smoke and ash. The remnants of its form swirled briefly, before disappearing into the cracks of the dungeon walls. The corridor fell silent. Before anyone could speak, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. Professor McGonagall appeared, her expression a mixture of anger and concern. What in Merlin's name is going on here? She demanded, her sharp eyes sweeping over the dust-covered corridor, and the three of you standing in its center. Felicity opened her mouth to respond, but McGonagall raised a hand to silence her. Her gaze settled on you, and the glowing orb in your hands. Explain. Now. You took a deep breath, your mind racing to find the right words. There was a passage, you began, glancing at Felicity and Colin for support. It led to a hidden chamber with this orb. Something was guarding it, and we had to... Enough, McGonagall said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she examined the orb. Do you have any idea what you've done? The weight of her words settled heavily on your shoulders. No, Professor, you admitted quietly. McGonagall sighed, her expression softening slightly. This orb is no ordinary magical artifact. It's a piece of the castle's ancient protections, meant to stay hidden. By disturbing it, you've weakened those protections and unleashed something the castle hasn't seen in centuries. Colin paled. Does that mean it's still here? McGonagall's lips pressed into a thin line. Not for now. You managed to subdue it, though I doubt you understand how. But this is far from over. She gestured for you to follow her. Come. This will require the attention of the staff, and I dare say the headmaster will want a word with you. As you followed McGonagall back toward the main castle, the orb still faintly pulsing in your hands, you couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and guilt. You had discovered something incredible, but at what cost? Felicity walked beside you, her expression unreadable. "Well," she said finally, her voice low, "at least it wasn't boring." Colin groaned. "If we don't get expelled, I'm never setting foot in the dungeons again." You managed a small smile, though your thoughts were already racing. The whispers, the creature, the ancient magic, they were all part of something bigger. And deep down, you knew this was only the beginning of a much larger mystery. At Hogwarts, secrets rarely stayed buried for long. The orb's faint glow seemed to grow stronger as you followed Professor McGonagall through the winding corridors of the castle. Its warmth pulsed gently against your palms, a reminder of the ancient magic it held, and the chaos it had unleashed. Felicity and Colin walked close behind, their earlier bravado replaced by a tense silence. Even Felicity, who usually had a sharp comment for every situation, kept her gaze fixed on the floor. McGonagall's stern expression didn't waver as she led you through a tapestry-lined hallway you rarely visited. The portraits on the walls, all of former professors, watched you with a mix of curiosity and disapproval, muttering to one another as you passed. Finally, McGonagall stopped in front of a heavy wooden door, with intricate carvings of magical creatures winding up its frame. "This is the staff meeting room," she said briskly. "You'll wait here while I consult with the other professors. Do not move, and for Merlin's sake, do not touch anything else." With a flick of her wand, the door creaked open. She ushered you inside and closed it behind you, leaving you alone with Felicity, Colin, and the orb. The room was small and circular, its walls lined with bookshelves filled with thick, leather-bound tomes. A large oak table sat at the center, surrounded by high-backed chairs. Above, a chandelier floated gently, its candles burning with an unnatural, steady light. The room felt heavy with the weight of centuries of decisions made here, and you couldn't help but feel out of place. Felicity broke the silence first. "Well, that went great," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Do you think we'll get detention, expulsion, or just turned into toads?" Colin groaned, sinking into one of the chairs. "I vote for detention. At least we get to stay human." You set the orb carefully on the table, its light casting long shadows across the room. "We did the right thing," you said, though your voice wavered slightly. "If we hadn't taken it, who knows what could have happened?" Felicity leaned against the table, her arms crossed. "Or maybe nothing would have happened if we'd just left it alone. Ever think about that?" You sighed, running a hand through your hair. The truth was, you didn't know if you'd made the right choice. The whispers, the collapsing passage, the shadowy creature, all of it pointed to something far larger than any of you could comprehend. As you sat in silence, the orb began to pulse more brightly, its glow casting strange, shifting patterns on the walls. Colin leaned forward, his curiosity overcoming his nerves. "Do you think it's alive?" he asked hesitantly. "It's not alive," Felicity said, rolling her eyes. "It's a magical artifact. Powerful, sure, but it doesn't have a mind of its own." "I'm not so sure," you said, studying the orb closely. The pulsing felt almost deliberate, as though it were responding to your presence. "It's like it wants something." "Wants something?" Felicity echoed, her eyebrows shooting up. That's exactly the kind of thinking that gets people cursed. Ignoring her, you reached out and placed your hand on the orb. The moment your skin touched its surface, the whispers returned, louder this time, but not threatening. They were clearer now, forming fragments of words that danced at the edge of comprehension. "Do you hear that?" you asked, looking at Felicity and Colin. They shook their heads, their expressions wary. "Hear what?" Colin asked. You closed your eyes, focusing on the whispers. They seemed to coalesce into a single thought, a single message. "The Chamber of Solace. Protect the light." You pulled your hand back, your heart pounding. "The orb, it's trying to tell us something. I think it's connected to the Chamber of Solace." Felicity frowned. "What's the Chamber of Solace?" "I've read about it," you said, your mind racing. "It's an ancient sanctuary, hidden somewhere in Hogwarts, designed to store and protect powerful magical artifacts. But no one knows where it is. It's been lost for centuries." Colin paled. "And you think this thing wants us to take it there?" "It's the only thing that makes sense," you replied. "If the orb is tied to the castle's protections, the Chamber of Solace might be the only place where it's safe." Felicity shook her head. "You're assuming a lot. And even if you're right, how are we supposed to find a place that's been hidden for centuries?" You looked at the orb, its glow steady and insistent. "I think the orb will guide us." Before you could say more, the door creaked open, and Professor McGonagall stepped inside, followed by Professor Flitwick and Professor Snape. McGonagall's expression was as stern as ever, while Flitwick looked concerned. Snape, however, wore his usual mask of disdain. "Explain," McGonagall said, her tone clipped. You recounted everything: the hidden passage, the glowing runes, the whispers, and the creature that had chased you through the dungeons. When you finished, McGonagall sighed heavily and exchanged a glance with Flitwick. "This orb," Snape said, his voice cold, "is a fragment of the castle's ancient defenses. By removing it, you have disrupted a delicate balance, one that may take considerable effort to restore." "It spoke to me," you said quickly, before you could lose your nerve. "It said something about the Chamber of Solace. I think it wants us to take it there." Snape's expression darkened. "The Chamber of Solace is a myth." "Perhaps," Flitwick interjected, his voice thoughtful. "But myths often have a kernel of truth. If the orb is responding to this student, it may be worth investigating." McGonagall frowned, clearly torn. "The chamber has never been found," she said. "And if it does exist, it could be incredibly dangerous." Snape's lip curled. "More dangerous than leaving the orb in the hands of a student?" Before you could protest, Flitwick stepped forward. "Professor, I believe this student's connection to the orb is no coincidence. If anyone can find the chamber, it may very well be them." McGonagall sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Very well. But you are not going alone," she said, fixing you with a sharp look. "Professor Flitwick will accompany you, and you will follow his instructions to the letter." The castle felt alive as you followed the orb's guidance through twisting corridors and forgotten passages. Its glow seemed to pierce through shadows that even the enchanted torches couldn't dispel, revealing parts of Hogwarts you'd never imagined. The stone walls around you seemed to hum faintly, as if the castle itself was aware of your journey. Professor Flitwick walked ahead, his wand raised, his tiny frame emanating an air of confidence and focus. Felicity and Colin followed closely behind you, their earlier bickering replaced by tense silence. The air grew colder with every step, carrying a sense of gravity that made each of you tread carefully. "This is no ordinary part of the castle," Flitwick said softly, his sharp eyes scanning the faint runes that flickered to life on the walls as the orb's light touched them. "We're entering spaces that haven't been walked in centuries." The whispers grew louder as you descended a spiral staircase that seemed carved from a single block of stone. Each step echoed ominously, the sound swallowed quickly by the thick, oppressive air. You clutched the orb tighter, its warmth the only thing grounding you. Finally, the staircase ended, opening into a grand, arched doorway set into the wall of what appeared to be a massive cavern beneath the castle. The doorway was covered in runes that glowed faintly in response to the orb's light. The whispers rose into a crescendo, filling your mind with fragments of ancient words. Felicity stepped forward, her wand raised. "That's it, isn't it? The Chamber of Solace." Professor Flitwick nodded, his voice quiet but resolute. "This is what the orb has been leading us to." You approached the doorway, the orb pulsing brighter with each step. As you raised it, the runes flared to life, filling the cavern with golden light. The door shuddered, its stone surface rippling like water, before slowly swinging inward with a groan of ancient magic. The Chamber of Solace was unlike anything you'd ever seen. It was vast and circular, its walls carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and shimmer when you looked at them. Floating orbs of light hovered in the air, each casting a gentle glow that illuminated the room. The air was thick with magic, a tangible force that made your skin tingle. At the center of the chamber stood a raised pedestal, similar to the one in the dungeons, but larger and more ornate. Its surface was etched with swirling designs that seemed to pulse faintly, in perfect sync with the orb in your hands. "This is incredible," Colin whispered, his wide eyes reflecting the glow of the floating orbs. "It's like something out of a storybook." Felicity, who was usually quick with a sarcastic remark, said nothing. She simply stared, her usual confidence replaced by quiet awe. Professor Flitwick's expression was reverent as he stepped into the room. "The Chamber of Solace," he murmured. "A sanctuary of the castle's oldest magic. Few have even dreamed of seeing this place." As you walked toward the pedestal, the whispers quieted, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the chamber. The orb grew warmer in your hands, its light steady and insistent. "You know what to do," Flitwick said gently, his eyes fixed on the pedestal. "Place it there." You stepped forward, your heart pounding as you carefully set the orb into the hollow at the center of the pedestal. The moment it touched the surface, a surge of energy rippled through the chamber. The floating orbs flared brightly, their light weaving together into a shimmering dome that enveloped the room. The carvings on the walls glowed brilliantly, and the hum of magic grew louder, vibrating through your very bones. It felt as though the chamber itself was coming to life. Then, without warning, a figure appeared in the center of the room, formed from the swirling light of the orbs. It was ghostly and ethereal, shaped like a dragon with gleaming, translucent scales and eyes that burned like molten gold. Its presence was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. The dragon's voice echoed in your mind, ancient and commanding. "You have awakened the solace of Hogwarts. Speak, and I shall judge your worth." You froze, your throat dry. What could you possibly say to a being of such immense power? Flitwick stepped forward, his voice steady. "We seek to restore the balance of the castle's protections. The orb was removed by mistake, and we—" The dragon's head turned sharply toward you, silencing Flitwick. Its golden eyes bore into yours, and its voice echoed again. "The orb chose you. Why?" "I don't know," you admitted, your voice trembling. "But I couldn't leave it behind. It called to me." The dragon regarded you for a long moment before speaking again. "The orb carries the light of the castle's guardians. You have been chosen as its keeper, but with this power comes a great responsibility. Will you bear it, even when the shadows return?" The weight of its words pressed heavily on your chest. You glanced at Felicity and Colin, who looked just as stunned as you felt, then at Flitwick, who gave you a small, encouraging nod. "I will," you said firmly. The dragon's golden eyes softened, and it inclined its head. "Then the solace is yours to protect. Use it wisely, Keeper." The light of the dragon faded, and the chamber grew quiet once more. The orb pulsed gently on the pedestal, its light steady and calm. As you left the Chamber of Solace, the air seemed lighter, the oppressive tension replaced by a sense of purpose. Flitwick walked beside you, his expression thoughtful. "You've done something extraordinary today," he said softly. "But this is only the beginning. The magic of the castle is ancient and complex, and there will be those who seek to disrupt it." Felicity smirked, though her eyes still held a hint of awe. "Great. More adventures. Just what we need." Colin groaned. "Can we have one quiet day at Hogwarts before we start saving the world again?" You laughed, the sound breaking the lingering tension. As the four of you made your way back to the castle's main corridors, you couldn't help but wonder what other secrets Hogwarts held, and what challenges lay ahead. One thing was certain: your life at Hogwarts was far from ordinary. As your day in Hogwarts draws to a close, let this journey remind us of the magic found in curiosity, the strength in friendship, and the courage to explore the mysteries that lie beyond the familiar. Remember, my fellow adventurers, that within the walls of Hogwarts, or in the chapters of our own lives, it is the choices we make and the bonds we forge that illuminate the path forward. Thank you for joining me tonight. Until next time, may your dreams be filled with the enchantment of spellwork the whispers of ancient corridors, and the promise of new adventures waiting to unfold. Good night.